My name is Oliver Chen. I'm 42, and I observed my father's funeral service from the last pew as my brother delivered a eulogy on how he had only a single successful son. The rain beat a rhythm against the stained glass windows while Clark's voice, amplified by the microphone, filled the crowded chapel. Dad always told me I was his greatest accomplishment, he went on, dabbing at his eyes with a handkerchief. The son who built something for himself, the one who never let him down. I remained perfectly still in my dress uniform, my hands clasped in my lap, as I watched 200 attendees nod in unison. They were all familiar with the narrative. Clark, the prosperous investment banker, Oliver, the family failure who escaped to become a soldier and never amounted to much. Dad had made certain that narrative was widely known. Oliver gave it a try, Clark's voice wavered with what seemed to be real emotion, but he just couldn't seem to find his purpose in the world. Dad was constantly concerned about him. He would often say, "At least Clark gives me something to be proud of." The woman beside me, the wife of one of my father's golfing partners, leaned in to whisper, "It must be so difficult for you, seeing your brother flourish like this while you—" She paused, her gaze sweeping over my uniform with ill-disguised pity. "Well, at the very least, you serve your country. That's commendable," I gave a polite nod. "Yes, Mum, it is." She patted my arm in a condescending manner. "Perhaps now that your father has passed, you can finally get your life in order, find a nice woman, have a family. It's not too late." If she only knew the reality. The fact was, I hadn't exchanged a word with my father in 8 years, not since our final family dinner, where he had presented me to his business associates as my other son, the one in the military. When they inquired about my role, he had gestured dismissively. "Oh, he's based somewhere on the other side of the world, handling administrative tasks or something. Not like Clark here, who just became a partner at Morgan Stanley." Later that evening, Clark had confronted me in the kitchen. "You know, Oliver, it might be time for you to mature. Dad is getting on in years, and watching you squander your life this way is destroying him." "Squander my life?" I asked. "Honestly," he motioned toward my civilian attire, a pair of jeans and a plain shirt. "Look at yourself. 34 years old, unattached, no children, playing soldier in some far-off nation. When are you going to start living a real life?" I departed the following morning and had not been back since. Now, 8 years later, my father was gone, and I was hearing his favoured son describe to everyone how much of a disappointment I had been to him. The service concluded, and the mourners began to file out into the dreary weather. I remained seated, observing my extended family convene around Clark, offering their sympathies and accolades. My Aunt Martha noticed me and came over with that recognisable expression of forced courtesy. "Oliver, dear," she began, her voice thick with feigned empathy, "I'm so very sorry for your loss. And don't you look distinguished in that uniform." "Thank you, Aunt Martha. You know," she continued, "your father mentioned you on occasion. He always wondered what you were truly up to over there. He used to quip that you were likely just pushing papers in an office with air conditioning." She gave a soft laugh. "But still, at least you secured steady employment, right? Not everyone can be a clerk." I managed to smile. "No, not everyone can." Uncle Robert joined our group, his face flushed from the brisk, damp air. "Oliver, my goodness. When did we see you last? You look—" He examined my uniform with the same bewilderment I had encountered my entire life. "Well, you look authoritative. What are all those decorations for?" Before I could reply, Clark was at my side. "Uncle Robert, Aunt Martha." He embraced them both. "Thank you so much for attending. Dad would have been deeply moved." "Of course, my dear," Martha said warmly. "He was so proud of you. We all are." Clark shot me a glance before turning back to them. "Oliver was just telling me about his job. Still based overseas, is that right?" His tone was civil but curt, the same one he had always used when referring to my minor military escapade. "Afghanistan?" "Actually," I stated calmly. "Oh, well," Clark gestured vaguely. "I suppose someone needs to fill the support roles. Dad always said the military requires administrators as well." Uncle Robert let out a chuckle. "Your dad used to fret that you'd never make your way back home. Said you were just hiding out over there because the real world was too challenging." The chapel was almost deserted now. Through the doors, I could see my father's associates getting into high-end vehicles, likely en route to the country club for the reception. The very club where Dad had hosted innumerable dinners, always introducing Clark as his successful son, and me, on the rare occasions I attended, as the other one. "Will you be at the reading of the will tomorrow?" Clark inquired, though his tone implied he was indifferent to my answer. "I'll be present." "Good. Although, frankly, I wouldn't anticipate much for you. Dad was quite explicit about his sentiments. He adopted a softer tone, as if breaking difficult news. He left the vast majority of his estate to me, the house, the investment accounts, the business shares. He said I was the one who comprehended what responsibility meant." Aunt Martha nodded in agreement. "That seems logical. Clark has established himself so thoroughly." "But I'm certain he left a small something for you," Clark went on. "Perhaps his timepiece or a few personal effects. He wasn't entirely without compassion." I rose to my feet slowly, adjusting the front of my dress uniform. "I should be on my way." "Where are you staying?" Uncle Robert asked. "Not in some budget motel, I trust." "The Hilton downtown." Clark's brow furrowed. "Can you afford that? I mean, on a soldier's pay." "I get by." "Well, should you need assistance with the expense, just inform me. I realize things must be difficult for you." I headed for the exit, the sound of my dress shoes echoing on the marble floor. From behind me, I heard Clark say to our relatives, "He's proud, you know, always has been. I believe that's one of his issues. He is incapable of admitting when he requires help." That evening in my hotel room, I sat on the edge of the bed looking at my phone. There were 12 missed calls from my second-in-command, 6 from my chief of staff, and 1 from the office of the Secretary of Defense. I had informed them that I required 3 days for a family matter, and they had granted it without hesitation. They always did. Because for the last 4 years, I had been Major General Oliver Chen, the Deputy Commander of Special Operations Command, the first Asian American man to achieve that rank, the man who had orchestrated 3 of the most effective counter-terrorism campaigns in recent military history, the man who briefed the President every Tuesday at 800 hours. Yet, to my family, I was still just Oliver, the letdown, the one who couldn't find his footing in the real world. The following morning I was seated in Lawrence Morrison's law office, clad in the same dress uniform I'd worn to the funeral. The office was precisely as I had imagined. Dark wood walls, plush leather seating, and shelves filled with legal volumes. It was the kind of setting where significant wealth was managed. Clark showed up 15 minutes late in a black Hugo Boss suit, his attention fixed on his phone. "Apologies," he said without looking up. "Conference call with Hong Kong. You understand." I remained silent. "Actually, you likely don't," he added with a slight chuckle. "We operate in different spheres, don't we?" Mr. Morrison sorted through a stack of papers. "Let us commence. The final will and testament of Charles Chen, dated March 15th of this year." He cleared his throat and started to recite the standard legal jargon. Clark settled back in his chair, his expression already one of boredom. I was certain he had been through this before. Dad had probably reviewed every detail with him, just as he had guided him in assuming control of his business network, his social connections, his entire legacy. "To my son, Clark," Morrison proceeded, "I bequeath my residence in the Hamptons, my investment portfolio with a major investment firm, and my interest in the Chen & Associates Consulting Group." Clark gave an unsurprised nod. "To my son, Oliver," Morrison paused, his eyes meeting mine, "I bequeath my apologies." The room fell silent. Clark frowned. "What is that supposed to signify?" Morrison continued reading. "I bequeath my apologies for failing to comprehend the man you became, for being blind to your achievements, for prioritizing my pride over the truth, and for allowing my own self-disappointment to manifest as disappointment in you." I felt a change within me, but my expression remained impassive. "Furthermore," Morrison went on, "I leave you my father's Medal of Honor, which he was awarded at Normandy, and which I am convinced belongs with the only other war hero in our lineage." Clark's phone dropped from his grasp. "War hero? What's he referring to?" Morrison set the will aside and took up another document. "There is more, in fact. A letter dated just 1 week ago." He looked at me. "6 months ago, your father engaged a private investigator to ascertain what your actual duties are in the military." My stomach tightened. "He discovered that you are not, as he had believed, processing paperwork overseas. He discovered that you are one of the most highly decorated officers in the United States Army, that you have been awarded 2 Silver Stars, 3 Bronze Stars, and the Distinguished Service Cross, and that you have commanded operations that have saved thousands of American lives." Clark was now gaping at me, his mouth slightly agape. Morrison continued to read from my father's letter. "Oliver, I have spent your entire adult life telling others that you were unsuccessful because I was too proud to concede that I was mistaken about the definition of success. I told them you were evading real life when in reality, you were living a life more real than any of us could fathom. The lawyer paused, then looked straight at me. He wanted you to be aware that in his final weeks, he told everyone who would listen about your true accomplishments. He contacted your commanding officer to express his immense pride. He had your medals professionally framed and displayed in his study. I sat completely still, absorbing this revelation. There is one additional item, Morrison said. He passed me a sealed envelope. He wanted you to have this. My hands were steady as I opened it. Inside was a lone photograph. My father in his study, pointing with pride at a wall adorned with my military awards, articles about my campaigns printed from classified reports he had somehow obtained, and photos of me in combat attire being decorated by generals whose names Clark would know from the news. At the bottom, in my father's script, were the words, "I should have inquired about what you truly did. I should have listened when you attempted to tell me. I am sorry I was too obstinate to see that I raised 2 remarkable sons, not just one." Clark was now peering over my shoulder, his face ashen. "Oliver, I don't get it. You're a general?" "Major General," I corrected him softly. "But you never mentioned it. You let us believe." "You never inquired," I replied. I folded the letter with care. When I tried to inform Dad about my advancements, he would redirect the conversation. When I brought up my deployments, he would make light of me playing soldier. Eventually, I ceased my efforts. Morrison cleared his throat. "There is in fact one final provision. Charles left instructions for this to be read aloud." He picked up another document. "To Clark, I am proud of your financial achievements, but it is imperative that you understand something. Oliver did not enlist in the army because he was incapable of facing real life. He enlisted because he sought to safeguard it. While you were accumulating wealth, he was saving lives. While you were ascending the corporate ladder, he was leading soldiers in battle. Both are of value, but only one constitutes a sacrifice." Clark's hands were now trembling. "Oliver, I'm so sorry. We had no idea." "You had no desire to know," I stated, standing and straightening my uniform. "There is a distinction. But why didn't you inform us? Why didn't you force us to understand?" I regarded him for a long moment. Because rank is not something one displays at a family dinner. Leadership is not a subject for boasting at social gatherings. And respect is something that is earned, not demanded. Morrison handed me the last of the papers. "Your father also stipulated that his funeral memorial fund be contributed to the Special Operations Benevolent Fund. He said it was the least he could do." I walked to the door, then paused. "Clark?" "Yes?" "That conference call with Hong Kong you spoke of? I had a similar one this morning with the Pentagon concerning a joint operation with Indo-Pacific Command." I turned to look at him. Different spheres, right? He opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. I left them there in that opulent office, with its leather chairs and legal books and the crushing weight of 2 decades of false assumptions. Outside, my phone was vibrating. My aide's voice was sharp and professional. "General Chen, we require your presence. The situation in Yemen has worsened and the Joint Chiefs are requesting your immediate counsel." "I will be airborne in 2 hours," I responded as I made my way to my rental car. I thought about the wall in my father's study, all those medals and commendations he had put on display after discovering the truth. All those years of disappointment that could have been years of pride, if only he had posed the right questions. But I also considered something else. The way I had remained in that chapel yesterday, allowing Clark to characterize me to a room of people who knew nothing of my actual life. The way I had permitted them to pity me, to console me, to view me as a failure. I had been as complicit as they were, in my own fashion. I had allowed their perception to dictate my silence. That would end now. I got into the car and turned on the engine. In 6 hours I would be back in a command centre, briefing cabinet secretaries on missions that would never be public knowledge, making choices that would preserve lives in ways my family could never comprehend. And for the first time in 20 years, that felt sufficient. Not because they were finally aware of who I was, but because I had finally ceased to care whether they knew or not. The rain had ceased, and the sun was emerging from behind the clouds as I drove to the airport. In my rearview mirror, the funeral home shrank in the distance, along with everything else I was leaving behind. I was finished with being the disappointment in the stories of others, It was time to be the hero of my own.